Hello and welcome to CTOs at Work podcast series. In this podcast series, we talk to technology leaders from all around the world and learn from them how they build and manage world class technologies and product, how they groom their people, how they build the foundation of successful organization, and many more interesting topics we discuss in this podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us who is the leader of leaders, a man who teaches leadership lessons to CTOs of many different world class organizations, and he is Mr. Andrew Weir. Andrew is the co founder and CEO of CTO Academy. The CTO Academy is on a mission to arm every deserving technologist with leadership skills required to achieve and make an impact in their own career, and as well as so that they can set up a strategic and competitive foundation and advantages towards the companies they're working in today's era of innovation. Andrew has more than 25 plus years of executive level experience with various size of companies, including enterprises, SMEs, larger scale companies across multiple sectors, including like law, tech, travel, leisure, and properties, and many other fintech areas as well. And Andrew core expertise is around the strategy, sales, funding, finance, M&A, and growth mindset. So, with this context, I would like to welcome Andrew. Andrew, today I'm so happy and feeling proud to have you on my show, as I myself is a big time follower of CTO Academy and have learned so many interesting things from your publications, from your resources which you publish on the website and different social media channel. So this is quite interesting. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, love, for such a warm and wonderful introduction. I'm going to bring you into my marketing team because you've captured what we do as well as anybody that's in the team. So thank you for that lovely introduction.
That's great. Thank you very much. So, what was your career journey and how you landed on this like amazing vision of CTO Academy?
Well, love, it's a bit of a rambling story, so I'll try and see it for the audience here very quickly. But I am probably the least technical guest you had or will ever have. So I am what you would probably term as a non-techie. So I come to this from a very different angle. My background, I was born in the UK. My father had some small businesses, so I cut my teeth within the small business environment. So we lived in a very country area of a place called Cornwall, which is now in the southwest of England. But my dad had a few ups and downs. In the 80s and 90s, if you went bankrupt in the UK, it was quite a big deal. It's less so these days. So I was one year in a private school and the next in a public school. So it was all a bit disconcerting for me. So actually, I parked my entrepreneurial side of me for a while, and then I decided to get back into it. So I took an MBA. I was then involved in a company that helped other people buy and sell businesses, so kind of M&A. And then I got a little bit bored about helping people sell their own companies. I decided to start my own. And that was really where this journey towards CTO Academy began. So I suppose for the last 10 years or so, I was quite heavily involved in startups, lots of war wounds that you would expect. If you're involved in the startup scene, you'll be familiar with it. But what I noticed quite often, and in one particular startup, it was really very, very noticeable, was in this startup, which was a really cool idea. It was all about predicting consumer behavior. I was an investor rather than involved in the business itself. But the CTO co-founder in that particular business was a fantastically bright individual, a really charming fella, but really struggled with the commercial side of that product. So much so that he spent so much time in the weeds of trying to develop the product itself that he didn't actually get out to the market quick enough. And in that particular situation, the market went quicker than the product development side of the business, and they missed the boat. Really, they certainly missed the opportunity. So it was a really stark example of from the non-technical side of the fence of how not having commercial leadership, soft skills, can really be to the detriment of the individual, but also to the organization and the stakeholders and investors, etc. So that was the kind of background, love, to CTO Academy. And then around about the same time, that was my background experience of it. And around about the same time, my now co-founder, Jason, who is a CTO of some many years experience, kind of came to me with the idea, really. He said, look, he felt in his career as a technology leader that he'd struggled to find a network or a learning platform for what is quite a unique skill set as a technical leader. You know, you're coming from a very technical perspective and you're being expected to transition into quite dramatically away from your comfort zone. You're being expected to suddenly acquire all of these soft skills and these people skills and this leadership ability. And it's just not you. It's just not something that you've been trained in. And if you think about it, all the C-suite roles, CEO, the CFO certainly, the CMO, the career kind of builds them up towards that role. Whereas for the CTO, it's a jarring change. And Jason came to me and said he found that change, that transition, really personally very challenging and very difficult. And so his mission was to set up CTO Academy, to provide that learning platform, that very nuanced learning platform, whether it be courses or coaching or just community, that would soften that transition, that would help people understand and negotiate it. And so we come from very, very different perspectives, but with a very similar mission. My mission is to, from a commercial perspective, is to say, look, how can I help these individuals to do that transition? And Jason's comes from that personal experience of struggling in his career to find something like this. And that's really where CTO Academy came from.
That's quite an interesting journey. Yeah. So it's well resonated well, your past experience, and I think this is absolutely, I would say, I can resonate with many of the CTOs around startups, around the established companies, and all. They are good at their tech because you rightly said, just like CFO and other roles, they get their upbringing happens on that specific domain. But as a like CTO, once you are a head of engineering and all, your role is different. And as soon as you transition to a CTO role, your vision and your thinking and the approach needs to be aligned absolutely with the commercial side and the business side. So once you, when you deal with in your courses, deal with these CTOs who are transitioning from the core tech to the side. So what are the challenges you see in those aspiring CTOs, or those who are just taken up the CTO role, but they feel, oh, somehow we need to learn more. So what are the challenges they typically feel?
Well, let me unpack that question in a couple of ways. I think there has never been a more exciting time to be a technology leader because every company now is a tech company. But there is a legacy, there is a challenge for those that are in the CTO role, because traditionally the tech side of a business was viewed as a cost center. Yeah, so typically in most organizations, small and big, the really key players at board level were the CEO and the CFO. And the CTO, to some extent, it was very much in a secondary position. They were treated, as I say, as a cost center. But that's changing dramatically. But there are lots of points of resistance to that change. So we did a recent survey, Love, at CTO Academy amongst our global community. And we're in 86 countries, so it was a very, very broad perspective. And we found out that even though every company is or should be a tech company, only 40% of those that had a CTO, the CTO was on the board. So there is still a big issue here about the impact that a CTO or the access to that leadership role that a CTO should be given. And that's aside from the fact that you sometimes have, particularly in America, I think, I'm not exactly sure in India, but you have sometimes this tension between the CIO role and the CTO role, who is doing what, where's the crossover? My perspective on that is fairly straightforward. The CIO is internal, it's data-led, the CTO is more strategic and external. But all of these things are going on. And then you also still have, quite often you sometimes have the fact that you're dealing with a non-technical board, possibly even a non-technical CEO. And you're therefore dealing with people for whom tech still is this giant black box. It's completely opaque to some of them, particularly if they're coming, for example, from a sales and marketing perspective. So the CTO has some real challenges there. in terms of communicating, in terms of articulating what the tech strategy should be, in terms of arguing for the budget. There are lots of points of resistance that a CTO has. So the reason for kind of giving you that background and that position of where the CTO is and has historically been is that to become an effective CTO, you have to negotiate some of those things. And it is rarely about the tech. From our perspective, if you're in anything, certainly a CTO role, but pretty much any senior tech leadership role, the technical skills are a given, or they should be. Okay. You're not being put into those positions for your tech skills, frankly. You're being put into that position for all of the other soft leadership skills that you need to either acquire or you already have. And so what I kind of mean by that is, you need to be business fluent. The CTO of the future has to have this crossover, and they have to kind of frame or improve their non-technical skills. And if they're not able to combine business with technical, not only are they clearly handicapping their own career progression, but companies are also being deprived of that interdisciplinary innovation that comes with having a business fluent tech leader. And also, frankly, let me put it this way to the audience. If you are a business fluent tech leader, you can take over the world because there are very few of them that can master the two disciplines. Yeah. So that's where we come from. But the points, the issues that tend to crop up are actually very, very soft and very, very simple, but they can be challenging to the individual. So having confidence is a big issue, we find. Having confidence and credibility to sit at that senior table and to have an impact at that senior table. We have, and we've been approached by many senior CTOs who suffer from the imposter syndrome on steroids. They are, again, because of their background, because their background is technical, because they haven't really been involved in some of these more strategic elements of a business. They do feel that very acutely when they are going into these senior roles. So we look at things like communication flows. How do you speak to a non-technical audience, communicating very technical issues? How do you understand the motivations of those different people at board level, which will all be very different and their agendas will be very different? How do you help your team to see that what they do contributes to that wider perspective within a company? And that comes down to, very micro elements of delegation of, for example, you'll probably raise an eyebrow of recognition to this because I find most technical people have this issue. But perfectionism, letting go, understanding that other people need to do it and they might not do it as well as you. But without learning those skills of delegation, without learning to offer or to build trust within the team that other people can take it over, you really struggle. And of course, you then begin to move into areas of how you build culture, how you give your team goals and not tasks, because if it's the other way around, you're firefighting all the time. Getting out from behind the keyboard. We still have a lot of quite senior technology leaders in our community who struggle to leave the code behind. So all of these things, this transition, these stepping stones towards a more strategic perspective are many of the kind of challenges that we face with some of our customers.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I think this is quite insightful and a lot of intellectual elements, as you mentioned about every company now a tech company. So definitely that increases more responsibility on this role of CTO. The business fluent tech leaders, absolutely, that's the current reality and the need is, because many a time business side people feel sometimes frustration while working with the tech leaders because they might lack these skills like communication flow, which you mentioned. Very interesting. I think you have very beautifully combined this aspect into this compact role of definitely the delegation piece. And I really love this your point of CTO should, when work with team, they should focus on providing goals and not just only tasks. This is amazing. So is there any framework or is there any guidance which comes as part of CTO Academy uh, courseware where people will learn, how they can think in terms of, providing goals. Because I found for technologists, this has become a very challenging to communicate in terms of larger goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer succinctly, love, because we offer a range of different answers to that, and it can be very, very specific and very bespoke. So we are working with a very large international organisation where they have various CTOs around the world. They have a group CTO, and the challenge for them, unfortunately, is that there is a toxic culture there. And it's not only a toxic culture, but it's a very traditional, old-fashioned retail business. So the group CTO is having a terrible struggle trying to bring these very business retail type organization forward into a kind of digital transformation um, mentality. So the challenges there are extreme, and trying to move and shift a toxic culture in a large organization is like trying to move the QE2 around in the water. So for that particular individual, it's a long, slow burn. But for the startups, for the agile, more light-footed of you, it is about building a culture. It is about building and developing trust and ownership, leading people through change. All of us are having to do that at all areas of leadership at the moment. And you cannot even start to develop that if you haven't built the trust and the communication within the organization, where people are owning that change themselves, wherever they are in the organization. They're understanding the reason behind it. They're understanding that it's the benefits to themselves of getting on board with that change. And we have various frameworks. For example, we have an executive leadership course called the Digital MBA for Technology Leaders. And within that, there are various case studies and frameworks that help different scenarios. So yes, we certainly do have frameworks, but we find the situations are so unique often to the individual. I'll give you another very, very quick example. A new CTO coming into a team where there's a superstar developer, someone who has traditionally been the star and is pretty immovable, and really dictates terms to the rest of the team. Now, we are coaching someone with exactly that scenario. That's a very, very that's a people challenge. That's not about frameworks. That is, how do I get this person on board to understand the impact they're having with their attitude on the rest of the team? One hates to bring in football analogies, love, but it is the superstar footballer who's brilliant on his own but terrible as a team player. So yes, we encounter scenarios and situations like this that often can fit into frameworks, but they are more often than not about people and about how you're managing people in and out of that kind of situation.
Yeah. Now, this is quite interesting. And in fact, as you spoke about digital MBA, and there are various different, ways and curriculums available on CTO Academy. So, what is the process? Let's say, uh, a startup CTO, a 10-member startup CTO, or an SMB or an enterprise. Do you recommend, each of these different category of people go through different courses of CTO Academy? That is one. And second is, what is the process for that? Let's say if a CTO is sitting down in US or sitting down in India, so what is the process they can actually get and get a guidance of CTO Academy?
Well, I'm going to take you back to the very start of CTO Academy, the very start of my relationship with it, to start the answer to that, love. And I think in one of your preparatory notes, which were wonderfully helpful, so thank you for those. One of the questions you asked about was, what was the aha moment with CTO Academy? And there have essentially been two major aha moments. Jason came to me with this idea in late 2018 from his own personal experience, as I explained earlier, at a little restaurant by the banks of the River Thames in London at the end of 2018. And he basically said, I want to start something called CTO Academy that's going to help technical people become more business fluent. Now, my instinctive reaction, I have to be honest with you, was I'm not sure this is very interesting or very an opportunity, a commercial opportunity. So we decided and we agreed that we would do a pilot. And when you look back, I'm sure anybody who's been in the startup, particularly anybody who's launched an MVP, which by definition an MVP should be embarrassing to you later down the road, okay? Because what you're doing is basically just going out there with a shocking quality of product, but you're using it to test a hypothesis. So we literally went to Jason's house in Wimbledon, very close to the tennis courts down there, and we recorded about 3 or 4 pretty short video lectures, video tutorials really on 2 or 3 very basic things about the CTO role. And we put a bit of an AdWords campaign behind it, and we just put it out there. We didn't restrict it geographically. We just put a bit of cash behind it and said, right, let's see what happens. To my astonishment, as a non-technical person, people were buying it very quickly, which is the first big light bulb moment. That was the aha moment. But what was more interesting, much more interesting, was they were buying it from around the world. So our first 5 buyers, bearing in mind we're based in London, I think none of our first 5 buyers were from the UK for this little tiny pilot. I think the first one was Colombia. I think someone actually from India bought as well. We had one in Australia. So what that immediately qualified for me was that this was an issue. This was a challenge for technology leaders around the world that was completely consistent. This journey for them was the same for the CTO in Bogota as it was for the VP of engineering in Melbourne. So that was my first aha moment with CTO Academy. I thought, this is really interesting. The pain is global and it's consistent across the geography of our target customer. So that was the first aha moment. And then we really built CTO Academy from there. And the kind of second aha moment, again, very familiar to anybody who's in a startup, was when you kind of find the product market fit. So going back to your question, everybody that's in our community is time poor. There is no CTO has luxury of time. It just doesn't happen. And so we knew quite early that as we were building, particularly the courses, but even the coaching product as well, it had to fit in with this lack of time that generally people in our community have. Now, whilst I say that, I'm absolutely astonished with how many of them are kind of lifetime learners and how many of them have more than one course. I don't know how they do it, frankly. It's quite astonishing. But we certainly built our course, particularly the digital MBA, very much to be running alongside that busy work schedule so we don't overwhelm people. And the other thing that we do, which I think is super important, is we make it human. So it's not just pre-recorded lectures that we just allow you to buy and say goodbye. That's the end of the relationship. We have live sessions every month that enable people to just articulate and to discuss and to debate and to get best practice. And again, bearing in mind that our community is very, very global, it's a really fascinating process to say, actually, am I the only person thinking this? Because from our research, we picked up very quickly that one of the challenges that the technology leaders have is that sense of isolation. They're in senior roles, they're making very big ticket decisions. They're often making them, as I mentioned earlier, amongst a peer group of non-technologists. So they're often, certainly at the board, they're sometimes doing it without any great support at board level. And so it's often a sense of isolation. It's often a sense of, is the market moving ahead of me? Am I making the right choice? So alongside the course material, which is very strong in our opinion, it's a key pillar of ours is to have these live debate sessions and to have a global community on, for example, we have one on Slack. It just enables people to dip in and out of that community and say, am I doing the right thing? Is this best practice, et cetera, et cetera. So that blended learning experience is absolutely key to what we do. And I think it's proving to be the second aha moment, which is the fact that I think that's our product market fit in terms of what's driving the best value for our particular community.
Wow. I think that's quite interesting. Great. I really loved it. Absolutely. And I think this is very amazing because the global uh, relevance it has all these courses in CTO Academy, and this is actually very interesting to know that globally across the industry, CTO is the role where there's a consistency across. There's a similar challenges, similar training programs need to be incorporated to these people. That's really very interesting to know, right?
I mean,
Definitely.
I'm sorry to interrupt, love. I was only going to say there are wonderful nuances, as there are with everything, of course, but there are wonderful nuances in behaviour. So behavior is a big factor. And of course, culture comes into that. And that's culture not just within the organization, that's obviously the wider culture outside the office doors. And so, as a very, very tiny example, we get very different questions from people coming to us from India, for example. There are very different pressures in terms of some cultural pressures. There are very different questions that we get about, for example, the heritage of CTO Academy. People in India tend to be more questioning of how long we've been trading, for example, and what are the testimonials that we have, perhaps to other areas. So it's really quite interesting, the nuances that come through in some of the questions that we get as an organization, but also in terms of some of the challenges. But yes, fundamentally, bearing in mind that, again, most of the companies we're dealing with are global companies. There are very few of them that are local facing. The challenges are incredibly consistent in terms of those leadership challenges. Absolutely, yes.
That's great. Also, when I talk about the CTOs of different organizations, so one of the big challenge which I usually see, they need some help in terms of defining their tech strategy, and the tech roadmaps, right? Which somehow, various people, as you rightly said, they transition from the core tech senior engineers to CTO. They have no clue around the strategies and the roadmaps and around, and then somebody is asking, oh, create this roadmap, create this strategy around. So is CTO Academy also helping organization at the bigger level in providing this strategic technology strategies or guidance around them, or how they should think about their technology strategies?
Well, I think the answer to that is probably a yes and a no. I mean, we are fairly light touch in actually, specifically saying what an individual should be doing. What we try to do is give them guidance on the factors that they should be bringing into that consideration. So, for example, the third module in the digital MBA, for example, is specifically about aligning tech strategy with business goals. So what you quite often happen, and there's quite a risk of it, is that there's a separation the tech team is in something of a silo in terms of what they're building, and that it's not aligned with actually what are the corporate goals. So our perspective is always about making sure that whatever you are building, whatever you're considering in terms of a strategic initiative, is bringing in all stakeholders and is bringing in the wider business perspective, because for obvious reasons, you could be building a product that is not aligned to it. You could be building a product that the customer doesn't want. If the CEO, for example, or the board are working on a strategy to attract a certain type of customer that's different to your understanding of it. So there's a fundamental in there about making sure that there is a very clear form of communication between all departments that enables that tax strategy to be aligned as closely as possible to those business goals. So it's those kind of fundamentals that we look at, and therefore we tend to bring in elements of corporate strategy, and analyzing corporate strategy. What is it? How do you understand where it comes from? Because if you're not building that holistic understanding of an organization and where tech fits into it, again, it can impede the ability of that technology strategy to be highly effective. So I think our focus is very much on those higher level helicopter perspectives in terms of how you develop that tech strategy, rather than necessarily diving into the details of how you would build it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think this also give a big breather to various organizations who are compliance centric, because they don't want any third parties or any training organization deep dive into their own areas of
Yeah, no, we often do get that pushback. Actually, that's a very, very good point. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And when we talk about the CTO role, in fact, when they think about any strategy, there are like three fundamental, like process, people, and technology. So, as a CTO role, which you have, talked to many different CTOs around the world. So, out of these three angles, which you think is the most important area for a CTO to put their maximum amount of energies?
100% people. I hesitated only to think whether it was process and technology that followed. 100% people. Because if you get the right people, you get the right culture, you get the right team, the rest of it tends to follow. And so, for example, one of the kind of consistent issues we have is we'll have a CTO or a tech leader at some level come into us and say, I'm having this problem, I'm having that problem, I can't get this, I can't get that. And when we strip it out, it's often about people, it's often about communication, and particularly with early stage companies, it's about that relationship with the CEO. And I was on a call only this morning, actually, with a CTO from New Zealand, and we were discussing about one or two of his challenges. And it emerged very quickly that the challenge was with the CEO. They're two very different characters. They communicate in very different ways. The CEO is not a process, but in this particular example, but I think this is typical, to be honest. The CEO flies off the seat of his pants. He's not a process person. The CTO is completely the opposite. And even in CTO Academy, love, we have this tension because Jason is a classic process driven and quite rightly so CTO, whereas I tend to not be so. So I had the conversation with this guy in New Zealand this morning, which was exactly the case. So, and it broke down that it was just communication. It was just a failure of both of them to communicate and to put themselves in the other person's shoes. So one of the lectures in the MBA is called Deep Listening. And it's one that we can all learn from. It's that kind of deep stroke active listening. It's that ability to actually listen to what someone is telling you rather than trying to think of your response or trying to look at it from your perspective. And so we did a series of lectures, a series of online interviews, I should say, during lockdown, actually. They were called Lockdown Learnings. I think they're still on our YouTube channel if people want to have a look at them. But we interviewed, just because we had nothing else to do, we were all sitting in our isolation. And so we grabbed all of these really interesting technology leaders. We had a director of engineering from Spotify. We had someone from CompareTheMarket.com in the UK, really senior level people. And we asked them a variety of questions, but we actually ultimately asked them, what is it that makes an effective CTO? What's the skill set that they viewed as being absolutely pivotal? And amongst the various things, and we're talking here the soft skills, of course, the technology was a given, empathy and emotional intelligence, and that ability to listen and to understand and to communicate in a way that the person listening is going to understand, almost consistently with every one of those interviews came very high up. So, and again, this goes back to some of the skills we were talking about earlier, that actually they're all about those people skills. So it's about your hiring strategy. It's about working out what the criteria is of the people that you want. Okay, it's about, once you've got them in the organization, it's about how do you inspire them, and not that kind of classic historic transactional leadership of you do what I say. This is all top down. Inspiration comes from values. It comes from purpose. It comes from tech for good. It comes from enabling those people to buy in. There's a reason why they're there. There's a reason why they want to work for you. There's a reason why they want to be led by you. Followers have to be inspired, and it's not just through wage packet, although that still plays a very significant role. So all these people who talk about perks and stuff, ultimately that still is the key. But being inspired by values and purpose, I think is super, super important. And it enables you to retain and to build those good quality people, and then they get a reward from that, etc. So of those three, undoubtedly people, the ability to hire the right people, to inspire them, to communicate with them. It's the CTO role ultimately is just another leadership role, okay? And what is leadership all about? It's about inspiring and delegating and bringing a team with you that can help you execute, because you can't do it all yourself. And there's a few technology leaders out there who still think they can. So number one, without a shadow of a doubt. And then I would say, because I come from a startup perspective, where getting process in place is always the challenge. So we have a lot of people in our community that we call accidental CTOs. And what I mean by accidentals, or what we mean by accidental CTOs, is essentially people who have been almost kind of thrown into the CTO role ahead of schedule. So a classic scenario is a startup that's just had some funding. We need a CTO, or they might be going for funding. Actually, that's often the scenario. So we need a CTO. Who's the most senior software engineer? You are. You've got the CTO hat, and we have a lot of these people that come to us and say, "What do I do? I've suddenly been told I'm a CTO." And of course, for those individuals, it is it's all about firefighting. It's all about getting a hiring strategy in place, and it's all about process. Although I would say, again, it's the hiring strategy of the people is first, but the process comes second. But certainly in that scenario, absolutely process, because without it, you're going to melt down. Technology clearly is a pivotal area for any CTO, but I think if you haven't got the people in the process right, then it doesn't matter what tech you bring in, it's going to fall down.
That's really very interesting, I would say, because here, usually CTOs thinks their role very differently, but you rightly said it's all about people, and then everything follows after that. And one very interesting thing I loved it actually, deep listening, which you talked about. That is really, really, amazing insight you have shared. And the thought on accidental CTO, that's really amazing, right? Even if I look at in my surroundings, I now have got 5-person name who are accidental CTOs. That's really
it's quite funny actually. I wrote a blog post about it, and we just I just thought it was a good name for it, and we suddenly got people coming to us saying, "That's me. You've identified me," because it requires a different it's a different learning curve for them. It's very, very sharp. And so from our perspective here, what we can deliver for them is shaped by the fact that they're in that kind of criteria.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Great. And I think this is a great segue to understand, because while running CTO Academy, and while in your past experience where you have built the uh, first UK that lawyer-based startup, and many other great interesting things you have done in your career. So, what is in your mind, like what is the biggest challenge which you came across, and which we in our podcast we also call this as a war story?
Well, anybody who's been involved I have so many war stories now that I'm actually a lecturer, Love, in a startup accelerator in London, where we help people transition from jobs, frankly, that they don't like, or they've got into a career they don't like, and we help them transition to a startup. So I have the war wounds, and I'm proud to declare them, because the one thing that I know, I got into startups quite late in my career, much to the disappointment of my wife, I have to say. But she stood by me, thankfully. The one thing that people on the outside don't realize is the sheer amount of grind and resilience that you need if you're going to be a startup founder, if you're going to be the tech co-founder, or whatever it is. The grind, the resilience, the uncertainty. So you mentioned that you wanted me to mention a few books. One of my all-time favorite go-to books for very early stage companies, very early stage startups, is called Lean Startup. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a book written by a guy called Eric Ries. It's really fantastic. And it's all about building a product on the back of market validation, not building something that people won't want. So it's all about taking steps. Every single step that you do in your product development has some kind of market validation or not. If you're not getting the validation, then drop it quickly. And Eric Ries describes a startup as a human institution that's designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And I think he captures it so beautifully, because it is incredibly high risk. The point of building all this up in terms of my answer is that if you haven't got an intrinsic motivation, if you haven't got an absolute passion for what you're doing, then it's going to be incredibly difficult to make a success of that startup. So then if you reverse engineer that statement, how do you know what it is that you want to do? How do you have that intrinsic motivation? And so one of the key areas in terms of what we do here at CTO Academy is the first chapter of our ebook, which is a 60-page ebook on how to become a CTO. And it's also almost the first lecture in our digital MBA is about knowing yourself. So it's about self-awareness and self-leadership. And what I mean by that is it's incredible how many people are doing a job or a startup or any kind of role in an organization which is not aligned with their own personal values. And here's something that the audience might be interested in, if this is a topic of interest. There's a really interesting test that we used to use in the accelerator, the startup accelerator, to try and help people drill into what their core values are. And it was basically, you can get this online. It's basically 100 values. You can get a list of these 100 values. They can be everything from honesty to ethics, whatever it might be. There's a list of 100 values. And then we ask the individuals that are taking this test to reduce that to 10. So to remove 90 of those values and just get down to 10. And they find that quite challenging because they're losing values that they think are important to them. And you say, right, okay, that's fine, but what are the 10 that matter to you? So eventually they get down to their 10 values and they look at these 10 values and yeah, that represents me, I'm happy with that. And then you say to them, right, reduce that list to 5. And honestly, I've been in a room with hardened professionals who have almost been weeping when they've been forced to reduce that list of values to 5 because, again, they're having to lose values that they think are important. But what that process is doing is it's getting them to the absolute core values, their intrinsic motivation. And ethics is a really good one because everybody thinks they're ethical. Everybody thinks they're really important that I'm ethical. But actually, are you doing a business where that's an absolute intrinsic motivation for you? Because if it isn't, it won't succeed. So in that particular exercise, we end up with people having a list of 5 core values. They say, right, that's what your startup should be about. Your startup or your role or the company that you're in should have all of those 5 values. Because if they don't, the intrinsic motivation that you need to make a startup successful will be incredibly difficult. So that's a rather long answer, I love, to a short question. But it is the best time in the world ever to start a business. I mean, particularly in India. I mean, unbelievable place to start a business. The opportunity and the dynamics of your economy over there is just sensational. So there's no doubt that if you have any instinct to start a business, you should be seriously considering it. But do not underestimate the challenges of making that thing work. So understand your strengths. Bring in other people to fill in your weaknesses. Don't be afraid to fail. Obviously, that's a fairly standard one. It's the best process for learning. And whilst I do back this whole never give up thing, because you're going to go through tough times, you also need to understand when to jump. So that's really where I think are the key learning areas for me. And never give up on yourself. The whole imposter syndrome, having a growth mindset. You will have so many people telling you it's going to fail, you're not going to work, why aren't you taking a job? If you've got those interests, if you understand your values and it's a passion and you want to go out and strike, because there's nothing better than working for yourself, then you believe in yourself, because most of you and most of us have got incredible talent and potential that we don't utilize. So those are things for me would be the key areas to think about if you're considering it or if you're in the middle of a startup at the moment.
That's really great. That's very, very insightful. Great. So this leads to the interesting segue to the last last question, as we are running out of time as well shortly. So, what are the key advice you would like to share with fellow CTO who have certain business ideas and they want to venture into the business?
Well, I've covered a lot of them in that previous answer, but I think a couple of things. I mean, clearly it's very, very high risk. So if you can side hustle your idea, okay, and there are lots of, you can start a business on an iPhone these days, okay. So if you've got an idea, but you don't quite rightly want to throw in what you've got, the security and the income, etc., then there are lots of ways of side hustling it. So try and tease the idea out first if you can. I mean, CTO Academy, it's great. We recorded 4 lectures. We stuck it on with a bit of AdWords. Neither of us gave up the other things that we were doing, but we got a trickle of interest that just started to make us allow us to have confidence in what it was. So if you're at the very early stages, I would absolutely recommend that you buy this book called Lean Startup, which is all about building something that then gets validated. So you're not jumping in with both feet. I did it. My first ever proper startup was done without any research. I didn't really look into it properly. I didn't consider the buyer, the market. I didn't know who my target customer was. I wasn't narrow enough. It was a nice idea, way too broad. And I went in with both feet. I had a bit of security in terms of cash, so it wasn't quite as big a risk for me at the time, but it was a complete disaster. It was totally under researched and under resourced actually. But I learned so much from it. But I could have done that without giving up my job. I could have easily teased the idea and tested it. So that's certainly a key area. One of the challenges with I was going to say seek mentors and seek advice. One of the challenges is that everybody's got an opinion, so you end up always having to go back to your own instinct. So I would say follow your instinct, but try and find a mentor. Try and find someone who's been around. Try and find a trusted, even one of these kind of internet gurus on startups. A lot of them speak a lot of rubbish, but if you can pick up on someone that chimes with you and you're aligned with, all that information that you can absorb into defining what you want to do and how you should do it. But the key thing is start simple. Start simple, build from that position, get it validated, and then make your decisions on the basis of evidence. Would be the way that I would start again if I was doing it.
That's a great piece of advice. Absolutely. This is really great. I'm sure, Andrew, the information you shared, the learnings which you shared, the experiences you have shared will be very, very valuable to all the audience of CTOs at work. And this will definitely help them. And this will definitely show them the right directions and right guidance in terms of moving towards the right direction of many things, right? We discussed about the startup, bootstrapping, the CTO role, how they transition, how they go through these training program, and what are the benefits they can get through. That's really amazing. So thank you so much, Andrew. That is amazing. That's really great.
Well, thank you, Levin. My final message to the audience is, we are very much here to help. If someone who hears this from CTOs at work gets in touch with me, andrew@cto.academy, you can send me a personal email. I will respond to them all, and if we feel we can help you, we will do our best to do so. But it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you very much. So I hope everybody likes this podcast today with Andrew here, CEO of CTO Academy. And he would be coming up with more interesting topics, more interesting ideas in our next week podcast. Until then, see you. All right. Bye.